Hello, welcome. Um, I'm Steve Watson, and welcoming comments. I was asked tonight by a student about giving advice, and I thought maybe I'd share my advice about giving advice. um, so the first element is to see that you are being asked to give advice. Sometimes we presume it. Sometimes somebody's just venting and we kind of hear the advice we want to give and we sort of make the leap that that advice is being asked for. So sometimes we're not in the role of giving advice. We're not seen as the advice giver for a variety of reasons. So ascertain your role and verify that you are in fact being asked to give advice. If you're not, you might suggest that you have some and see if somebody's open to it, right? You may step into the role if invited and welcomed. So that's step one. See that you are in fact invited and welcome to give the advice. I've done a whole video on that, so see that you're seen as a teacher before teaching. However temporary that may be, doesn't mean that you're in the permanent role of teacher in relationship to some other person or group. So anyway, see that you're being asked to give advice. Step two, see that you are in it is the right time to give that advice, to share that advice, to elucidate that advice, to proffer it, to pass it on. So I say time, but it could be place, and that could be that this is the wrong place, and therefore this is the wrong time because we're in the wrong place. So sometimes I know that somebody's asked for the advice, and they see me in the role of the teacher, at least in regards to this particular advice request. But this is not the time or the place, or this is a fine place, but not the right time. So I might be in the right place, like here I am in my martial arts studio, and there's a kids class going on of toddlers, 5 and 6-year-olds, and the advice that I'm being asked is, what do you do if you're shot 3 times with a .45 caliber in the chest, and how do we, apply a pressure dressing and fight back? Okay, this is the right place for that advice, that's fine. So get your pressure dressing, your tourniquet, and develop your skills. But with the 6-year-olds, I'd rather not engage in that advice right now. So, number one, is this the role that you're invited into, not that you're simply stepping into? Is this the right time? Then 3 is, well, let's just think for a second. What would be the third step? Right. So 3rd is being sure that you have good advice, right? It doesn't have to be perfect, but we want it to be at least some steps improved over what somebody had been working with. So it doesn't even have to be comprehensive, and it doesn't have to be the best or the most. It doesn't even have to be as broad as can be or as deep. It just has to improve the condition. Obviously, you'd like it to improve the condition as much as it might, given the circumstances and including the people involved. So that isn't to say be as sparing in your advice as you possibly can, but ascertain the appropriate amount and see that your advice is going to serve this population. So the advice that I give one population is different than the advice I may give another population. So based on perhaps their gender, or their size, or their age, or their experience level, or their religious background, or their ethical makeup, or their intellectual aptitude, or their sort of bandwidth that they have available for things, a whole bunch of different reasons. that the advice may vary, but I want to make sure that the advice I'm about to offer feels like it's likely to provide some value. This isn't strictly, let me measure the advice and say this is a worthwhile thing. So, for example, we can poll, 5 billion out of the 6 billion people on Earth and say, is gold valuable? Oh my God, are you kidding me? A hunk of gold, a nugget of gold, a brick of gold, a flake of gold? Yeah, that's valuable. Yes. But we could also poll a bunch of people who are sustenance farmers, relatively cut off from civilization without trade. They say, no, it doesn't have any value. I would have preferred a knife, or I would have preferred some pigments, or I would have preferred you help me, hunt the deer that we're hunting, or whatever. So it isn't that advice is objectively valuable. It's valuable in relation to the person that it arrives at, the advice receiver. So I don't just say, well, somebody asked me about giving up smoking. I have handily over here my give up smoking advice, and I'm going to give it to them. Well, that might work for a lot of people, and it might be work for the sort of population that I'm normally in front of, given where I teach and who I teach, and that's fine, and who comes to me because of who I am and how I am. But I really find that it's important to discern the appropriateness of this advice for this person at this time from this person, right? So sometimes a particular sort of advice works really well for this person with their issue, but not from me, right? For example, I'm not the pastor. So if I give word for word the pastor's advice to this person who has this problem, it doesn't meet them because it came from me, right? And similarly, if the pastor gave that same person some advice about how to fight off a mugger, even though it's word for word what I would teach, and let's just assume I can give that information accurately and helpfully, that may not meet that person. So one, am I being asked to give the advice? And really measure that, right? And sometimes it's an interrogatory, like check in. Like, I think you're asking me for advice. 2, is this the time and place? Is this the time to share that advice? 3, is this advice valuable? Relatively, somewhat, to some extent. And if it isn't, maybe practice shutting up, right? Or maybe practice patience and say, normally I know what to say to a smoker, but in this case, I'd rather sleep on it, I'd rather think about it, I'd rather introduce you to my friend who I think could help better, I'd rather recommend this book, I'd rather hear more from you and give me a chance to percolate and integrate and consider and contemplate before perhaps I'll have some advice to share. So feel free, if you're joining in on the comments, if you have a feedback or a question, I'll see if I can help or interact. So that's 3. So 4th is how do I deliver? Excuse me, I have some chai here. Absolutely enjoying it. Goes great with kiwi. There you go. You want to sit in for this, buddy? Good job. Very nice. Here you go. Is that good? You can stay right there. Good job. Very nice. Here you go. I'll help you out there with a little blanket. Okay? And a little kiwi. Bob. This is Bob. So 4th. Yeah, 4th. Are we following along? 4. Is how does that advice come? Let's say come packaged, or how is it presented? So we have the advice, which we'll assume here is objectively helpful because we've considered it and not just pulled it off the shelf or regurgitated from somebody else. But I've been invited, this is a good time, and I have, in this case, something custom that will suit you. Okay. So Thank you, Dave. Exactly. If you have the link to that, please post it in the comments, because that's exactly the lesson I was relating to. So thank you. Yes. I've been invited. As far as I can tell, I understand that I have in fact been invited to give advice. This is an appropriate time, and I have determined, customized, some helpful bit of advice, maybe a fair bit of advice, maybe a lot of advice. And then, can I deliver it, or can it be delivered in a way that is serving the needs of the person receiving the advice? And in fact, even serving my own needs. So this isn't just like aesthetic and dressing up and appearance in that very, very surface idea, but it is in fact important how the advice arrives. So for example, I may provide advice in a sort of statement. I may provide advice in a parable. I may provide advice in a story about my teacher or myself. I may provide advice in terms of like a book recommendation. I may provide it in terms of a homework assignment. I may provide it in terms of I don't know, maybe for me, I think what I might think about doing is something like, I don't know, just as I think back on my life, based on my sort of how I am, maybe I might do it this way. So I'm determining as best I can through empathy and connection and consideration and certainly experience, what is the best way to present this, right? So we had the gold nugget idea. We might also say a slice of pie. Yeah, obviously everybody is like, yes, always, anytime, give me perfect, ultimate food, yes, right? Whether it's pizza pie or pumpkin pie, like yes, apple pie, hook me up pie. And then if I said, so, any pie is perfect? Yes. At any time? Yeah, sure, why not? Anytime I'll eat pie. And then I just surprise you and smush you in the face, maybe right before you're having your wedding photos taken. Well, no, I just got burned, the pie was hot, you ruined my dress, messed up the picture, chipped my tooth, who knows? So it isn't true that just because the pie, obviously, everybody would always say is great and perfect and necessary to life, but how would that like to arrive, right? On a plate, on a paper plate, in a bowl, by your bedside, at your table. How would you like the pie delivered? With coffee, right? With ice cream, with a slice of sharp cheddar cheese, whatever it might be. But it's as important as getting the right advice, is getting that advice delivered in the appropriate way. Sometimes, I know for me, that means that advice is delivered in a rhythm. So it comes multiple times in more or less the same phrasing. So a particular person hears that, and it's supported by hearing it a few times, right? Hey, Bruce Fagan, how are you? I wish I had trees in the background. Sorry. I have a pine cone in the background, if that counts. Right? Okay. Excuse me. So it's not discreetly important. Hey, Todd. Hello. Good to see you, my brother. It's not important that we have the right advice, and it's not just important that we know how best to deliver it in the circumstances. It's when it gets delivered, and it's, am I being asked to be the deliverer? So, am I being asked to deliver? Do I have something? Is this a good time to deliver? Do I have something to deliver? Is it packaged well? These are all the elements of giving advice. Now, you'll notice that none of this is about, is that advice followed? Is it followed as soon as you'd like? Is it followed as precisely as you'd like? Is it followed as accurately or as well as you'd like? Right? So as soon, as accurately, as well. Is it followed as often as you'd like? Is it followed as sincerely as you'd like? Usually not. No, it's not. Partly that's because it's easier to give advice than to live it. So you might not even follow it as well as you say that you would. Secondly, the other person has their role in the transaction, right? And it's a whole other video to talk about how they might receive that advice and pick it up and relate to it and sincerely apply themselves to it. That's a whole bunch of other lessons there. But that's not my job. My job is not to catalyze the advice and integrate the advice. That's not my job. My job is to offer the advice, and I've described it in 4 different elements. Once that advice is offered and some time has gone by, I can certainly hear from the person about, did they understand it? Did they remember it? Did they follow it? Have trouble following it? Partially follow it? Start to follow it? Misunderstand it? Have difficulty in terms of intention or willpower or commitment to it? All those kind of things. And I can certainly then just review my own advice giving and say, now that I hear your feedback, I kind of feel like I could have offered it a different way, or I could have offered the advice slightly differently, or I could have offered a slightly different time or in a different tenor or a different tone or a different frequency or rhythm. So, I can certainly learn to be a better advice giver. That's what I endeavor to do. My job is closer to advice giver than most anything else. But it really isn't about the one who receives the great news about all the people who followed my advice faultlessly and thereby became, sainted exemplars of humanity. That's not how it goes. Part of me wishes that would happen, of course, and it certainly believes in my own advice, right? Like with anybody. And a wonderful practice about non-attachment is to give advice, right? To be committed sincerely to that advice in that process. But once I give it, I've actually given it. It's yours. Whether or not you do with it what I would like, or as often as I'd like, or to the extent that I'd like, or the frequency I'd like, that's up to you. And that's a second level of, another level of our relationship. Maybe I can then support you in following the advice, but that's a different thing. That's not giving the advice. So my advice to you, well, we'll just have to see. That'll depend. It's probably rather personal. It would happen in a more personalized setting. So hopefully that helps everybody to some extent. If you have thoughts on it or feedback, particularly if you think I missed something, I'd really appreciate the opportunity here. I'm going to just check the comments. It looked like it was just a bunch of people saying hello. Sorry. I guess the volume was on. That kind of messed that up. I'm just trying to get to the comments here, but I don't really know. Oh, there they are. I'm just reading Dave's. Yeah. Well, welcome. Hi, Diana, if you're still there. Thank you very much. Okay, I think I'm going to end this. My plan is, by the way, is to go live in a few minutes with a little meditation. So feel free to join me. Thank you.